Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Shanice Green. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I could tell the difference between something damaged and something ruined. That was my work. I restored old houses in San Diego, especially the kind of worn-down bungalows developers looked at and saw as empty lots with walls in the way. I saw old wood, original glass, hand-cut trim, and the patience of people who had lived ordinary lives inside rooms that still deserved to stand. By the summer Roman Ellison and I were supposed to get married, I had my own small restoration firm on Fern Street, 3 employees, a waiting list, and a reputation built one careful job at a time. Roman loved that about me when we were alone. That was what made the betrayal harder to explain later. He was not always cold. He was not always careless. Some nights he came to the shop after work with dinner in paper bags and sat on an overturned paint bucket while I finished invoices. He would loosen his tie, watch me measure damaged plaster, and say, "You see things most people walk past." When I doubted the Fern Street grant, he sat beside me until midnight reading the proposal line by line. "You earned this," he said. "Do not shrink just because my family's name is somewhere on the letterhead." I believed him because he sounded proud. In private, he made me feel chosen. In public, he made me feel tolerated. His family never said anything direct enough for me to object to without looking sensitive. His mother, Valerie Ellison, smiled at my dresses and asked if I had something less practical for formal weekends. His father, Duncan Ellison, spoke to me like I was a charming charity project attached to his son. Roman's best man, Quentin Avery, once joked at dinner that Roman had fallen in love with a woman who came with her own toolbox. Everyone laughed. Roman touched my knee under the table and whispered, "They do not mean anything by it." I wanted to believe that, too. I told myself every family had habits. I told myself love required patience. The night before our wedding, I went to the Hotel del Coronado to surprise Roman at the private dinner. I was not on the guest list because I had told him a site inspection ran late. The truth was that I had finished early, washed my hands twice under the shop's sink, changed into a deep green dress, and driven across the bridge with a card in my handbag. I had written that card over 2 nights. In it, I told him I loved the man he was when nobody was watching, and I was ready to build a life with him board by board. I thought the card was romantic. By the end of the night, it felt like evidence from a crime scene. The private room was down a short hallway near 1500 Ocean, lit with candles and filled with the kind of laughter that belonged to people who had never wondered whether they were welcome. The door was open a few inches. I heard Roman before I saw him. His voice had always been easy for me to find in a crowd. Then I heard him laugh, that full, unguarded laugh I loved, and I stopped with my hand inches from the door because I wanted to know what had made him sound so free. Roman said, "Honestly, I still cannot believe I am stuck with her for the rest of my life." For 1 second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the whole room laughed. Not one person. Not Quentin being foolish. Not his uncle trying to be clever. The whole room laughed in a warm, familiar wave, the kind of laughter people give a joke they already know. That was when the pain changed shape. It was not only the sentence. It was the understanding that everyone had heard some version of it before. They did not need an explanation. They knew their part. Roman had been loving me in private while letting me become a private joke in rooms where his family, friends, and business circle practiced looking respectable. I stood in the hallway with my card in my handbag and finally understood why I always felt tired after their dinners. I did not open the door. I imagined it for a moment. I imagined the laughter dying, Valerie lifting one hand to her pearls, Duncan measuring the damage, Quentin saying it was only a joke, and Roman doing the fastest calculation of his life, trying to decide how much I had heard. I did not want to give them the drama. I did not want to become another scene they could reshape later. So I turned around and walked back through the hotel lobby, past chandeliers and framed photographs of people who had once stood on that same lawn 100 years earlier. Outside, the fog was low over the water. I stood there with a wedding less than 14 hours away and knew I would not walk through that door. I drove to the apartment above my Fern Street shop because some quiet part of me had kept it all for years I was with Roman. I used to tell myself it was storage for tools and leftover tile. At 2 in the morning, still wearing my wedding eve dress, I understood I had kept it because some part of me knew I might need a door that opened only for me. I sat on the daybed until 4. I did not scream. I did not call him. I did not ask God why. I let the facts settle. By dawn, I knew the right decision in a collapsing house was never the loudest one. You opened the wall carefully, found the rot, and stopped trusting what could no longer hold weight. At 5, I drove to the house in La Jolla where Roman and I had been living. He was not there. He had spent the night at his parents' house in Coronado with his groomsmen because Valerie called it tradition. I packed one bag with the things that were unmistakably mine. My grandmother's sewing box, my first crew photograph from City Heights, my work boots by the back door, and the dress bag holding the wedding gown I would not wear. The engagement ring came off easily. It had always been half a size too large. I set it on the kitchen counter on top of the card I had never delivered. I did not write anything else. The silence was the message. Roman found the ring at 11 the next morning, less than an hour before the wedding party was supposed to arrive at the hotel for photographs. The ceremony was scheduled for 2, and 400 chairs were already arranged on the Windsor lawn. His first call went to my phone. I had silenced it. His second call went to his mother. By noon, the wedding party had heard that I was overwhelmed. By 1, guests were being told I had always struggled with belonging in rooms like that. By 2, Roman stood in a perfect suit before an arch of white ranunculus no one would walk through. My parents sat in the second row and heard 3 explanations before anyone asked whether they had spoken to me. They had not. My mother, Beverly Green, kept her hands folded in her lap the way she did when she decided a room was not safe enough for her truth. Later, she told me she knew I had not run because I was frightened. You were raised to face hard things, she said. If you left, there was a reason. Roman did not give anyone that reason. His father did not want the reason. Quentin clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You dodged something, honestly. Better now than after paperwork." Roman laughed, thin and hollow, but he still laughed. That mattered. By then, I was 3 hours north at a diner off Interstate 5 with coffee going cold in front of me, and my phone turned face down on the table. The waitress was maybe 60, unhurried, and kind in a way that did not announce itself. She saw the garment bag across from me, the ivory fabric visible through the plastic, and did not ask a single question. I ordered eggs because eating breakfast was something living people did. I decided somewhere near Oceanside that I would continue being a living person. Someone who ate. Someone who went back to work. Someone whose life did not end because a room full of people laughed at the right moment for the wrong reason. I let my lawyer handle the practical pieces. Canceled contracts, deposits, the shared residence, the engagement property, and a written notice warning Roman's family not to spread false stories that damaged my business. We had never married, so there was no divorce. There was no house to divide. There was only the strange, thin fact of a life fully assembled and then taken apart in one overheard sentence. I stopped answering Roman's calls by October. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because every message asked for a conversation he wanted before I was ready to give him anything. My dignity became a job site. I protected it with permits, boundaries, and locked doors. The Fern Street bungalow took another 6 weeks to finish. I stripped the last damaged plaster myself from a ladder in September heat and found original horsehair plaster underneath, intact in one corner after 100 years. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since the diner. It was not only about Roman. It was about discovering that something built with care could survive neglect and still be worth saving. The finished house became the best work I had ever done. A city historic resources contractor stopped outside and asked who had restored it. A neighborhood paper ran a small feature with my name spelled correctly. I read it twice beside Grady's coffee and felt quietly seen. Grady Joseph had worked with me since my early framing days. He did not talk much unless the work required it, which was one reason I trusted him. When I called and said I was ready to pay him a real wage instead of cash for extra help, he said, "You finally ready to admit you cannot do everything alone?" I said, "That was not the question." He replied, "Same thing," and showed up at 7:30 the next morning with 2 coffees. By February, my firm had grown from 3 people to 6, with Grady running his own crew. The story Roman's circle told about me was that I panicked. The work told a different story every morning. Roman heard about the Fern Street article through mutual acquaintances who watched his face too closely. He had repeated the cold feet version more than once by then. Each time, it came out smoother, the way a lie does after enough people help sand down its sharp edges. But the lie began to bother him. He drove past Fern Street one October evening, telling himself it was the faster route, though it was not. The porch light was on. The scaffolding was down. He did not stop, but he sat too long at the stop sign, long enough for another driver to tap the horn. That same week, Duncan Ellison mentioned the Fern Street grant at dinner and said attention was not always a compliment. The Robinson Avenue house entered my life in January. Torrance Bell from the Preservation Council called about a Craftsman-era house in Bankers Hill with a demolition notice posted on its door and one investor trying to save it before a developer tore it down for 6 luxury units. When I first walked through it, the original fir floors were dulled by grime but not ruined. The built-in hutch still had wavy glass. The porch joists were old-growth redwood, the kind of wood you could not buy anymore. I told Torrance I needed the structural report by Friday and the full list of people connected to the Preservation Fund. The Ellison Group name appeared on the 4th line. I read the list 3 times and did not call Roman. The version of me from a year earlier might have turned coincidence into conversation. That version had died on the drive north from Coronado. I built my proposal instead. 60 pages, full structural assessment, phased budget, financing plan, letters from neighbors, and support from the Historic Resources Board. I dropped the binder at the council office myself and did not look back. 3 weeks later, an embossed invitation arrived for a spring benefit at Maston House, where all finalists for the current preservation cycle were expected to attend. On the back, among the sponsors, was the Ellison Group. I set the card on my counter and took a long breath. Maston House was usually a museum, but that night the ropes were down and the rooms were full of caterers, donors, council members, and people dressed carefully enough to be photographed. I arrived in a rust-red dress the color of the porch joists I had spent months trying to save. For the first half hour, the night belonged to my work. A woman told me the Fern Street porch had convinced her sister not to replace her original windows with vinyl. An older man from the Historic Resources Board said my proposal was the cleanest he had read in years. I thanked him and meant it. Then I saw Roman across the parlor near the fireplace. He crossed the room slowly, and I had time to decide I would not run. "Shanice," he said. I said Roman. He looked older than 9 months should have made him. "I wanted to say something to you for a long time," he said quietly. "I am sorry for that night, for what you heard, and for how I handled everything after, which was worse than the sentence itself. I believed him more than I wanted to. That was the complicated part. I said, thank you for saying it. But I did not come here to have this conversation beside a fireplace at a fundraiser." He nodded. I walked away to speak with the woman who cared about her sister's windows. The program began before 9. Robinson Avenue appeared on the wall with photographs I had taken myself. Then another slide appeared beside it. Competing proposal, Ellison Coastal Holdings, 6-unit residential development. I read it twice before the meaning landed. Ellison Coastal was not only connected to the sponsor list. It was a subsidiary quietly bidding to tear down the exact house I was fighting to save. I found Torrance near the drinks table and asked how long that bid had been in the file. "Since February," she said, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "I assumed you knew, given the connection." I said, "There is no connection. Not anymore." I found Roman near the porch doors, alone with an untouched drink. "Did you know your family's company is trying to tear down the house I am fighting for?" I asked. His surprise looked real, which irritated me because a lie would have been easier. "Ellison Coastal is my father's and Uncle Everett's," he said. "I do not sit on that board." I did not know Robinson Avenue was on their list until the slide appeared. I said, "That is convenient." He replied, "It is not convenient. It is just true." I asked only one more thing. "I needed to know you were not standing here tonight already knowing and smiling at me." He said, "I was not." I believed that part too. In June, he showed up at Robinson Avenue unannounced with a folder of internal financial information. I stopped him at the porch steps. "You cannot be here like this," I said. "This is an active job site, and whatever you are carrying needs to come through proper channels." To his credit, he stopped. The old Roman would have pushed forward because his intentions were good. This Roman said, "You are right." He sent the documents through his attorney to my attorney and copied the Preservation Council. The records showed Ellison Coastal's bid was 18% above its own valuation. It was not a normal bid. It looked less like development and more like pressure. When my lawyer confirmed the documents were clean enough to use, I still did not thank Roman in the way he wanted. I met him later outside the property, in full view of Grady and Torrance, because I was finished having private confusion with him. "You want to help?" I said. Go ask your father's board why an 18% overpay does not bother anyone. That is not help for me. That is you finally doing something with your own name. He said, I am trying to be useful. I replied, trust is not rebuilt with one apology and one folder. It is earned in small, boring, repeated ways when nobody is applauding. He looked hurt, but he listened. A month later, Roman heard his father speaking in the study at the Coronado House before a board dinner. Duncan was not shouting. Men like him rarely needed to. He spoke in the cold language of strategy, saying Robinson Avenue was not valuable enough to justify the overbid financially, but perception mattered. He said the family could not appear to lose publicly to the woman who had walked away from Roman. Roman stepped into the doorway and said, she did not embarrass me. I embarrassed myself. His father turned slowly. Roman continued, she left because of what I said and because everyone in that room helped me make her a joke. If this bid is punishment, you are aiming it at the wrong person. That was the first time Roman openly broke with his father. It was not dramatic enough to fix anything, but it mattered. He called the Preservation Council the next morning, not me, and asked whether a bidder could withdraw without violating fund bylaws. He was not a controlling partner, so he could not force the withdrawal. His question still reached Duncan through an assistant, and Duncan responded the way men like him respond when challenged. Quietly, indirectly, and through someone else's money. 2 weeks later, the fund's largest private foundation paused all new disbursements pending an internal review. On paper, it had nothing to do with Robinson Avenue. In practice, it removed 40% of my budget. Torrance called me herself. She sounded like someone reading language a lawyer had softened. The grant was paused, then formally withdrawn 11 days before the vote. Without replacement funds, my bid would fail the fund's viability threshold, and Robinson Avenue would default to Ellison Coastal's proposal. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked for the reason in writing, the appeal procedure, and the deadline for submitting revised financing. When the call ended, I drove to Robinson Avenue and sat on the fir floor in the dining room until the light through the old glass moved across the wall. I thought about quitting for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I stood up and called my lawyer. We did not beg. We filed a formal request for review. We asked the council to examine the appearance of conflict on the Ellison side, not mine. We gathered letters, client references, inspection reports, and proof that my bid had been evaluated on merit before the personal history became public gossip. Then the gossip became worse. A local society column ran a piece about the preservation fight and included the rehearsal dinner sentence like it was colorful background. It said Roman had joked about being stuck with me, and the room had laughed. It suggested nobody knew whether the comment played a role in the canceled wedding. I read that line 4 times, then placed my phone on the counter before my hands could shake. That article created the public truth moment I had never asked for. 2 board members claimed my history with Roman created an appearance of conflict. My lawyer requested a disclosure hearing and invited Roman, Duncan, Valerie, Quinton, Torrance, and the fund's ethics council. I walked into that room in a navy suit with my hair pinned back and every document in order. I did not cry. I did not perform pain for strangers. When asked why the wedding ended, I said, I did not get cold feet. I overheard my fiancé humiliating me at a private dinner. The laughter told me the joke was familiar. I left because I understood I had been treated like a private joke by people I was about to call family. Roman stood after me. His voice was steady, but his face was not. What she said is true, he said. I made the comment. The room laughed because I had allowed that kind of disrespect before. After she left, I helped my family present it as cold feet because that story protected me. It was a lie. Quinton shifted in his chair. Valerie looked down at her hands. Duncan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Roman continued. My father's company then pursued a bid that created a serious appearance of retaliation. I cannot speak for every person involved, but I can speak for myself. Shanice Green did not run from a wedding because she was afraid. She walked away because I gave her a reason. The room changed after that. Not loudly. More like air leaving a sealed wall. Torrance requested an ethics pause. The council's counsel recommended that the Ellison sponsor seat be suspended from all decisions connected to Robinson Avenue and that Ellison Coastal submit additional disclosures about the overbid and funding relationships. The Society columnist later printed a correction stating that the wedding had not ended because of cold feet. The correction did not erase the first article, but it changed the public record. Duncan's development bid no longer looked like smart business. It looked personal, petty, and risky. 2 donors quietly withdrew from an Ellison-hosted event. A bank advisory committee asked Everett to step back from its regional board pending review. The missing 40% came back in the most complicated way possible. An anonymous donor offered an irrevocable pledge through the Preservation Council. This time, nobody accepted it casually. The council vetted the source, required a conflict affidavit, confirmed that the donor would receive no ownership interest, no naming rights, and no influence over the vote. The money was placed in escrow until the ethics review cleared it. I did not know then that the donor was Roman. I only knew the paperwork was clean, and the house had another chance. When I asked who it was from, the finance officer said, "Someone who does not want credit." For once, I let that be enough. The final site visit happened on a Friday morning after the council limited access to safe areas only. We had temporary barriers, sign-in sheets, hard hats, and Nolan Weir, the structural engineer, checking every support before anyone stepped past the front rooms. Roman came with the sponsor group, wearing work boots and holding nothing. "I am not here to interfere," he said. I said, "Good. Stay where Nolan tells you to stay." The board admired the restored hutch glass, the fir floors, and the porch column. Grady's crew had matched so precisely that one member ran her thumb along the seam twice. For 10 minutes, I let myself think the house might finally be allowed to speak for itself. Then the back section groaned. It was not negligence. Nolan's logs later proved every jack had been checked that morning, but 3 days of unexpected rain had softened a small patch of soil beneath one footing. The moment I felt the shift under my boots, Nolan shouted, "Everyone out now." I turned toward the access panel on instinct, still thinking like a worker instead of a person who needed to survive. Roman grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the hall, just as part of the old plaster ceiling came down behind us in a burst of dust and lath. We landed hard near the front doorway. A chunk of trim struck his shoulder instead of my head. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the site shut down immediately. The insurance adjuster came. Nolan filed a supplemental report. Work stopped for 2 weeks while the soil, supports, and repair plan were reviewed. That pause nearly broke my payroll. I paid Grady's crew from my savings because I refused to let my people carry the cost of someone else's fight. During the insurance review, my bookkeeper, Paula, found the chain of custody on the anonymous pledge. The money had come from a personal trust established under Roman Ellison's name, funded by an inheritance from his grandmother. Not the Ellison Group. Not Ellison Coastal. Roman. I drove to his apartment that evening with the printout in my hand. "You," I said when he opened the door. He did not deny it. "I did not want you to know," he said. "That was the point. I did not do it so you would owe me anything." I said, "You should have told me." He asked, "Would you have taken it if I had?" I did not answer because we both knew I would not have. He said, "You were about to lose something you earned because my family's name was all over the fight. I had money doing nothing. I wanted to do one useful thing without standing beside it asking to be seen." I looked at him and hated how honest that sounded. I said, "This does not fix what happened." He replied, "I know." I said, "It does not make us what we were." He said, "I know that too." For the first time, he did not reach for me. He did not step closer. He did not turn remorse into a performance. He stood in his doorway and let the truth remain uncomfortable. That was when I noticed the difference between wanting something and demanding it. I said, "It is not nothing. It is the first thing you have done for me all year that was not about being seen doing it." Then I left before either of us could make it larger than it was. The vote was not the easy victory newspapers later made it sound like. It was 5-2 after 6 weeks of review, disclosures, legal letters, and payroll stress. Ellison Coastal lost the bid. The overvaluation became part of the public record. The Preservation Council removed the Ellison Group from its sponsor board for the next funding cycle and adopted a conflict policy that should have existed before my name ever entered the room. Duncan Ellison stepped back from the acquisition arm that winter. The business press called it succession planning. People closer to the family called it damage control. Quinton's Circle stopped using my name as a punchline because Roman stopped sitting in rooms where they did. Roman changed slowly, which was the only version of change I trusted. He stopped calling unless there was a practical reason. He sent information through lawyers or the council when that was the proper channel. He cut ties with Quinton after another careless joke made it clear the old circle had learned nothing. He moved from the demolition side of the family company into a smaller residential restoration division that repaired older properties instead of clearing them. I did not clap for him. I did not reward basic decency with access to my heart. I simply noticed. Noticing was the one tool I had always trusted. It had saved me in houses. It had saved me in that hallway. Robinson Avenue reopened the following spring on a clear evening with string lights along the porch eaves. My firm had 6 employees by then, and Grady stood near the steps wearing the proud, uncomfortable expression of a man being thanked in public when he would rather check a punch list. Torrance introduced the project, thanked Nolan, thanked the crew by name, and thanked me last. She called me the reason this house is still standing. That was plainer and truer than anything the Society column had ever written about me. The crowd applauded for the work, not the scandal. For the first time in a long time, I stood in a room connected to Roman's world and did not feel like a guest on trial. Roman found me on the porch before the program ended. He looked up at the restored ceiling for a while before speaking. "You did this," he said. I replied, "Grady did most of the framing." He said, "That is not what I meant." I said, "I know what you meant." We stood side by side without touching. After a moment, he said, "I am not going to make a speech." I thought about it, but then I remembered what you told me. The account does not get paid with a performance. It gets paid in small, boring, repeated things when nobody is watching. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man who had finally learned the cost of the laugh he once thought harmless. "You were changing," I said. I saw it. His eyes moved to mine, but he stayed quiet. I continued, "I can believe that and still not go back." The words hurt, but they also freed something in me. "I loved you," I said. "I loved the private version of you who brought coffee to the shop and believed in my work. But I almost married the public version who let people laugh at me. I cannot build a life wondering which version will walk into the room." Roman swallowed once. "I understand," he said. For once, I believed that he did. I took the small brass key to Robinson Avenue from my pocket, the original front door key restored with the lock. For a second, his eyes dropped to it, and I knew he remembered the kind of ending we might once have written. The kind where I handed him the key and told him to come hold the ladder at 7 in the morning. I closed my fingers around it instead. "This key is mine," I said gently. "Not because I hate you. Because I earned the door it opens." He nodded, and there was no practiced grace in his face, only acceptance. "You did," he said. "You really did." I left him on the porch and walked down into the crowd without looking back. Behind me, Robinson Avenue glowed through every restored window. The front door opened to the community, the fir floors polished, the hutch glass catching light the way old glass does when someone finally cleans what time tried to bury. Duncan Ellison's name was no longer on the board. Quinton's laughter no longer followed me into rooms. Roman's apology no longer needed to be the center of my healing. I had escaped the joke, corrected the record, saved the house, and built a life that did not require anyone's permission to stand. For the first time, the evening belonged entirely to me. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.